True Crime Coven, Gooligans, before we get back into this case, I need to talk to you about something equally as addictive as true crime, but like way less illegal. And that is Deutsch cookie dough. And no, I'm not talking about sneaking bites and wondering if you're about to contract salmonella. This is 100% safe, edible cookie dough. Eat the whole container. I support you. I support snacks of all kinds. But this is the snack of all snacks. And you guys know me, I love food. Deutsch is like my own little personal tub of therapy. Having a bad day? Have some Deutsch. Feeling a little sad? Have some Deutsch. Babe, you're not sad. You just need cookie dough. And it's also top 5 allergen friendly, which is fantastic news. Not that I have allergies to any of those things, but if you do, you can eat it. And y'all, it is just as much fun to say as it is to eat, I promise. And you don't have to eat it raw. You can bake it. It's cookie dough. There are directions on the tub. So if you feel a crash out coming on, skip the bad decisions. Don't do that. Grab the cookie dough instead and use my code SPIRITS20 to get 20% off your purchase. Link is in the show notes to get started on your new snacking obsession. I promise you won't regret it. I've already eaten 4 tubs today. All right, stay safe and stay snacky. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is Suspects and Spirits, and I'm your host, Taylor Seraphin. And today, we got a two-parter. Two-parter today, everybody. I'm finally covering a heavy hitter, and it don't get much bigger than this guy. I mean, physically speaking. There are obviously other serial killers, even more famous than this dude. But today, we are going to be covering Ed Kemper, Edmund Kemper III. Many of you have been asking me to cover other serial killers, especially after the Peter Woodcock case. That one really blew up. Didn't expect that. I think it's because he isn't as well known. He's also not American. Not that like we don't know of others that aren't American, but you guys know what I mean. You know what I mean. A lot of the big serial killers we have here in the States, unfortunately. But I did take your advice. And now that it's summer, I had a little more time to dedicate to researching this one. I already knew a lot more about him than I probably should. I actually dug up some of my notes from college in my psych book, which I wrote in like the margins of for this one, because we talked about him in depth in my abnormal psych class. We had like discussion groups on Fridays, and Ed Kemper, he came up a lot in conversation because of mostly his demeanor, the way he carried himself, which is understandable. He's very fascinating, but he's also horrific. So if you don't know who Ed Kemper is, he's still alive. I imagine if you're listening to this, you do know him, but if not, he was terrible and he did awful things to young women and even his own family members. So trigger warning, there will be talks of animal cruelty, dismemberment, necrophilia, because yeah, he was one of those. And it's very disturbing. So if that's not your thing, please skip this one. It gets pretty rough. I will do my best not to overshare details that are not necessary to share, but I mean, it is important to the story, and he is a monster. And unfortunately, not the only monster that was active at this time in California. While Ed Kemper was active in good old California, killing people, so was Herbert Mullen, who Ed actually was in prison with, and we'll talk about him in part 2. The Hillside Stranglers were active at this time, and as was the Manson family, and even some of the later Zodiac murders. So California they were really going through it. They were going through it, guys, and they they kept going through it, unfortunately. But today we're going to focus on this guy. This big old 6'9", 300-pound brutal murderer of 10 people, Edmund Kemper III. So, trigger warning has been initiated. Listener discretion is advised. Now's your chance to bail because we're going to dive in. Ready? Here we go. Edmund Emil Kemper III was born on December 18th, 1948, making him a Sag. He was a Sagittarius, and he was born in Burbank, California. He was the middle child in the family, and while his parents were married when he was born, that marriage did not last very long. And in 1957, when Ed was still a very young boy, his parents divorced. And this was a very pivotal event that would shape much of his worldview. And that is because throughout his life, Kemper would become almost obsessively focused on his relationship with his mother. Lots of mommy issues. Are we surprised? No. In interviews conducted decades later with Kemper, he repeatedly returned to that relationship, like nonstop. Everything went back to mommy dearest, viewing much of his life through the lens of what he believed his mother thought of him and how she treated him. So, following his parents' divorce, Ed moved in with his mother and his two sisters to Montana. And from an early age, there were some really significant issues between him and his mother. She struggled with alcoholism throughout much of his childhood, and according to Kemper, a lot of criticism that was constantly present in their home. When listening to prison interviews from Ed, one thing becomes immediately apparent, and that is no matter what topic is being discussed, the conversation always circles back to mommy. While he occasionally accepts some responsibility for his crimes, honestly, I wouldn't even call it responsibility. He just admits to it. Much of his narrative focuses on the role he believed she played in shaping him. Lots of blame there. So we're definitely going to be talking about some nature versus nurture here, as always. One aspect of Ed's childhood stands out particularly because it was very, very troubling. So, around age 8 years old, his mother forced him to sleep in the basement and reportedly locked the door at night. So, he couldn't even get out. And for a child, especially one that young, being isolated in a dark basement would have been extremely frightening and emotionally damaging. By modern standards, many would probably view that treatment as abusive. I mean, I do. However, the explanation his mother gave is equally as unsettling. She claimed that she feared Ed might sexually assault or molest his sisters at 8 years old. To be clear, there is no evidence that he had done so at that age and no evidence that he was even going down that path yet. He was still very young. But according to her, there was something about his behavior that was concerning. Whether her fears were based on intuition or she was just batshit crazy, we don't really know. But her treatment contributed to a lot of later problems for him. Whether she genuinely recognized troubling traits earlier on, it's really impossible to know. She's not around to say. She's not around to give her side of the story. What is clear is that as time passed, some of those fears appeared to become increasingly relevant, which is why we're talking about him today. Now, when it came to Ed's father, Ed the second, Ed Jr., he wasn't exactly subtle when describing his ex-wife. His father was a World War II veteran who had participated in nuclear weapons testing, and he later said that, quote, suicide missions in wartime and the atomic bomb testings were nothing compared to living with her, end quote. Whether that's an exaggeration born from a bitter divorce or an honest reflection of the life with Clarnell Kemper, his mother, it gives us a glimpse into just how volatile people around her believed she could be. But we do need to acknowledge that what's often overlooked in documentaries and podcasts about Ed Kemper is that nearly everything we know about his mother, Clarnell, comes from two men who deeply disliked her ex-husband and her serial killer son. So that doesn't mean that their claims were false. It just means that we don't really get the full picture, right? Most researchers agree that she was likely very, very critical, very emotionally harsh, and difficult. But separating fact from resentment it can be complicated in these cases. I don't agree with locking your kids in basements. Obviously, I think that's fucking horrendous. So I'm definitely not excusing her. She sounds awful. But I think there is probably a lot more to that relationship than we know. Even Kemper's older sister, Susan Swanson, offered a more nuanced description. According to Susan, their mother, quote, liked real people and she could be real harsh, end quote. She also recalled that Clarnell, their mother, would just verbally tear into Ted, just rip him to pieces with her words, saying things like, you're just like your father. And for Ed, that was very upsetting. He's a child. He's forming his own opinions of himself and the world and how people view him. And I think that that's extremely damaging to a child. Emotional, psychological abuse can at times do way more damage than physical abuse. And Susan, his sister, wasn't trying to justify serial murder or, build a sensational story, but it does give more of a window into how Clarnell could be toward her son. It doesn't sound like she acted that way toward the girls, which is bizarre. Well, I guess it's not that bizarre. People tend to treat sons and daughters differently, which I don't agree with, but it does seem that she had some real issues, and this was not a good environment for Ed to be in. Now, as a child, Kemper exhibited some very dark and disturbing fantasy play, fantasy life. He later described obsessive thoughts about killing his mother, which isn't great. He also began engaging in behaviors that, while unusual, are worth examining in context. Many children, will damage dolls or engage in odd forms of play that doesn't indicate future criminality. It's like things kids do. But Kemper's behavior went way beyond ordinary childhood experimentation. And years later, after his capture, Kemper would recall those incidents with a very unsettling level of detachment. He's just always very detached. In one interview, he described destroying one of his sister's dolls after becoming angry about one of his own toys being ruined. And at first, he simply just popped the doll's head off. But when he realized that it could easily be reattached, he escalated the destruction by cutting off its hands as well. Then he laughed and said, quote, "Now I had a toy that didn't work so good, and she had a toy that didn't work so good." End quote. And this is one of those moments that becomes more chilling in hindsight. Not because destroying dolls or brothers tormenting their sisters automatically predicts violence, but because of the mindset underneath it. The destruction itself seemed really satisfying to Ed, and in his mind, now they were even. So there was control through destruction that would become a reoccurring pattern throughout his life. Ed also really enjoyed games as a child, but not like hopscotch or jacks or hide and seek. No. He developed a game that he played with both his sisters and neighborhood girls that he called Gas Chamber. Yup. During these games, girls would lead him into a room and pretend to gas him, and he would die. And other times they would blindfold him and lead him to a chair where he would act out elaborate scenarios where he would be electrocuted. So, children often create strange games. Like, that's very clear. I'm a teacher. I see it all the time. I'm like, what are y'all playing? But even by those standards, this behavior, uh, very not okay. Like, I remember playing Harry Potter after reading the book for the first time and seeing the movie in third grade, but I didn't even want to use Avada Kedavra because I was like, what if I'm actually a witch and I accidentally kill someone? Like, the principal is going to be so mad at me and the principal won't believe me. Not even the police. You guys, my thought was the principal because I was a child and, I didn't put two and two together. But I was genuinely concerned with hurting someone with my 6 spells, but I never did. So don't worry, never used that spell. Still won't. Needless to say, though, Ed's games, they were not that, and they were pretty not great. And as his fantasies became more pronounced, they began crossing into real world violence. Like many serial killers, Kemper's first victims were animals. So, this is a trigger warning. We're going to be talking about some really awful animal cruelty here. At age 10, you guys, 10 years old, he buried a family cat alive. And this act itself was disturbing enough because not only did he kill the animal, but he prolonged its suffering. Doing that to an animal involves a lot of control, torture, and just deliberate infliction of fear and pain on a very defenseless creature. It's disgusting. But he didn't stop there. Burying it alive wasn't enough for Ed. He then dug up its body, decapitated it, and mounted its head on a spike. Kemper later stated that he derived a lot of pleasure from this, from successfully lying to his family about killing a cat because they were like, "Oh my God, what happened to this cat?" And he was like, "I don't know, it just died." He was never forthcoming about it. And this gave him a lot of confidence in his ability to lie to people and get away with killing something. And unfortunately, he did not stop there because 3 years later, at age 13, he killed another family cat. Now, I guess his reasoning for this was that he thought the cat favored his sisters more than him. Very, very troubling. Uh, he slaughtered this one with a knife and he kept pieces of its body in a closet, apparently. So now we see a very troubling pattern was emerging. He harbored a lot of violent fantasies about his mother. He mutilated dolls. He engaged in disturbing role play and he had become killing animals. So combined with that instability at home, an alcoholic mother, an absent father, the warning signs were becoming impossible to ignore. And what's interesting is I found in my research that some criminologists have wondered whether Kemper's fixation on cats reflected his later hatred of women. Obviously, his mother played a big role in that, but they noted that cats have long been associated with femininity, independence, autonomy, qualities that Kemper really struggled with throughout his life because of his relationship with his mother. But psychologists also very much caution that there's no definitive evidence that he targeted cats because they symbolized women. What's more important is the nature of the cruelty itself. So Kemper wasn't just hurting animals, he was practicing domination and control and violence for years and years before his first human victim. Now, like many children of divorce, Kemper really longed for a relationship with the parent he no longer lived with, his father. In interviews, he often spoke very fondly about the time he spent with his father, describing it as a positive experience. However, the reality actually appears much more complicated because while he did spend time with his father, the arrangement ultimately failed, and he was effectively rejected and sent away once again. So he was quite delusional about his relationship with his father. Could have been a coping mechanism. Maladaptive daydreaming is common in serial killers. But after he was rejected by his father again, his mother then made another decision that would significantly impact his life. Clarnell ended up sending him to live with his paternal grandparents in North Fork, California. Now, by this stage, Kemper had experienced repeated rejection by everyone in his life. And he had been removed from his father's home, struggling in his mother's household, and now found himself being sent away again. So, this was not a great time for Ed. And his paternal grandparents were very similar in behavior to his father. So, really strict, very authoritarian, very cold, very distant, highly critical people. A lot of his mistakes were met with, punitive consequences. They aimed at penalizing or shaming him instead of helping him understand why the things he was doing was wrong. They were not supportive or nurturing in any way, which is really important to a kid's psyche. Like they need to know that if they make a mistake, it affects other people emotionally, and you need to help them understand why doing that is wrong, right? So he had no emotional regulation, nobody to help him understand how to do that. So, like I said, living with his grandparents in rural California was hardly an ideal situation for teenage Ed. Many young people love their grandparents, but few would choose to spend their teenage years isolated in that kind of environment with relatives who were very hard on them. For Kemper, the move likely compounded a lot of feelings of rejection and resentment. Psychologically speaking, abandonment and attachment issues can have profound effects on people. When primary caregivers repeatedly reject a child, that child often develops deep insecurities and questions of their own worth. Now, while some people internalize those feelings, they direct the pain inward, they blame themselves, become, emotionally withdrawn, self destructive. Others turn that pain outward and they blame others and they project, much like Ed. So Ed began to view other people as responsible for his suffering. And over time, that resentment seemed to transform into a belief that punishment was justified. A very, very dangerous mindset. Now, like feeling angry if you're hurt by somebody, that's totally normal. That's a normal emotion. That's valid. Learning how to process that anger in a healthy way is what separates a healthy coping mechanism from a dangerous obsession. When resentment festers like that, it can become extremely destructive. And for Ed, that was his why. That was his reason. So by age 14, he was living with his grandparents, Edmund Sr. and Maud Kemper. He reportedly struggled to get along with his grandmother. In particular, his grandparents maintained very strict boundaries with him and disciplinary expectations. And while they did provide him with a home, Kemper didn't really feel loved or emotionally connected to them, which is crazy. I mean, most of the time people think of their grandparents as like overly loving, right? Like almost too much. A lot of times grandparents will spoil their grandkids, but not Ed and Maude. Now, whether they recognize the severity of his issues is unclear, but they did appear to have been attempting to provide stability. Like they were trying. They were doing what they knew how to do. Unfortunately, stability alone was not enough because at only 14 years old, Kemper already stood 6'4". He was very big, and despite his imposing size, classmates later described him as someone who was frequently bullied. So, between having issues at school and now also having issues with his mother, his father, his grandparents, tension was rising, and particularly with his grandmother, and it would just continue to grow. And eventually that resentment turned deadly because on August 27th, 1964, Kemper would end up killing his grandmother. This was his first murder. Now, the murder itself was shocking enough, but what followed was even more disturbing because after killing her, he waited for his grandfather to return home. So when Edmund Sr. arrived back from grocery shopping, Kemper decided he would shoot and kill him as well. His explanation for that second murder of his grandfather was that he claimed he didn't want his grandfather to have to discover his wife's body. So, in his mind, killing his grandfather was somehow an act of mercy. The logic is very flawed here, obviously. Impossible to comprehend for a good reason because we don't think that way. But rather than allowing his grandfather to grieve the loss of his wife, Kemper was like, nah, I should murder him too. And that's what he did. Now, what's even more disturbing about this situation is that the rifle he used to kill his grandparents had actually been gifted to him as a Christmas gift the previous year. So they gave him the rifle that he ended up killing them with, which there's a lot to unpack there. Now, accounts do differ regarding exactly what triggered Ed to do this. Some reports suggest an argument with his grandmother ensued that escalated very suddenly. Some claim that she was working on a book. She liked to write children's books when he shot her. There's another version where, in an interview I listened to with Ed, he had gotten into a habit of shooting birds out of trees, which is also unsettling. And his grandmother didn't like this. So he grabbed his rifle. He was standing outside with it. And his grandmother said, "Hey, Ed, don't shoot those birds. Don't shoot those birds, Ed." And instead of shooting the birds, he turned around and shot her. So, lots of versions of this story, and Ed tells them differently sometimes, but whatever the motivation, the result was the same. And he claims that his reasoning was that he just wanted to know what killing someone felt like. He said, quote, "I wanted to know what it felt like to kill grandma," end quote. So, there's that. And then after murdering them, Kemper actually turned himself in. He decided to make two phone calls. The first was to his mother. He wanted to tell her what he had done, and the second call was to the police. Afterward, he sat on the porch and just waited for officers to arrive. And those phone calls reveal something very complicated about his psychology. Part of it seems like a deliberate attempt to punish his mother in a way. Like, you sent me here, this is your fault, maybe him thinking that. But another possibility is that beneath everything else was just a 14-year-old boy who had committed an unimaginable act, and he may have instinctively reached for the one person he always seemed to obsess over, his mother. Because whether it was punishment or desperation or some combination of both, that's unclear, but he always went back to his mom, no matter what. Because even though she was awful to him, she made him feel terrible about himself, a child just wants to be accepted by their parents. So that may very easily be why he contacted her. So when police arrived, they saw Ed, and he was eventually placed into state custody and diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. He was committed to Atascadero State Hospital, which was a facility for the criminally insane. Ironically, this would become one of the environments where he thrived. Kemper really thrived there. He got along remarkably well with staff members, he built really strong relationships with psychiatrists, and he became known as a model patient. In fact, he was eventually given responsibilities that allowed him to assist staff members within the facility. But what is really interesting is that the psychiatrists and social workers had disagreements about his diagnosis. So, psychiatrists and social workers disagreed with the court psychiatrist's diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. Their reports stated that Kemper showed, quote, no flight of ideas, no interference with thought, no expression of delusions or hallucinations, and no evidence of bizarre thinking, end quote. They also observed him to be highly intelligent and introspective. When they first tested his IQ, he scored a 136, more than 2 standard deviations above average for his age. Kemper was then re-diagnosed with a less severe condition of a personality trait disturbance, the passive-aggressive type, and later on during his stay there, he was given another IQ test, which produced an even higher result of 145. And I would probably agree that he didn't seem like a paranoid schizophrenic. And if you know any personally or if you've worked with them closely, it's fairly easy to identify. Ed was extremely methodical. Even as a boy, he was super smart, very charming. He could read people like a book and charm the pants off of them. That was part of what made his later diagnosis in 1973 of antisocial personality disorder more clear. But it is wild to me that it wasn't until after his crimes that he was diagnosed. I mean, he was able to fool everyone at 15 years old, which is pretty scary. So, what they didn't see when he was a teen is that Ed exhibited the classic traits of a sociopath or psychopath. And while sociopath isn't an official medical diagnosis, professionals and forensic psychologists who often evaluated him classified his condition under antisocial personality disorder, also called ASPD, which is what I will be referring to it as because it's easier to say. And this is often, very often, coupled with severe narcissistic and sexual sadism traits, which he had. The primary traits he displayed included lack of empathy, pathological manipulation. He was very smart and used his intellect to manipulate doctors and even the justice system to believing he was rehabilitated when he was 21, which we're going to get into. The third thing was that he was cruel to animals, which we talked about. And then the fourth was the grandiose sense of self. He viewed himself as incredibly smart and in total control, eventually giving highly detailed, boastful interviews to the FBI and criminal profilers. And it is really important to note, though, guys, that people who are paranoid schizophrenics, they're not a danger to others usually. They're more of like a danger to themselves, and they aren't murderers. Like, they're just not. Also, not everyone with ASPD, antisocial personality disorder, they're not murderers either. It's a really complex system, the brain. The brain is fascinating. And a lot of it goes back to nature versus nurture, tale as old as time, which brings us to our next problem during Ed's stay at Atascadero State Hospital. So during this stay, Kemper was surrounded by adult offenders, many of whom were very violent criminals, sex offenders, and despite only being 15, he was immersed in that environment filled with just dangerous individuals. More significantly, he was given access to inmate files because he became so close with psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors that they were like, hey, let's give Ed a job and let's have him actually help us with filing papers, scheduling patient appointments, things like that, because he was so smart. They figured if we give him something to do, this will be good for him. So he was given access to psychological evaluations, patient files, psychometric testing materials, and diagnostic records. And for someone as intelligent as Kemper, this access became an education. He learned how psychologists evaluated patients, and he learned what behaviors professionals viewed as signs of rehabilitation. He learned exactly what he needed to say and what he needed to avoid saying to convince experts that he was safe and healed, I guess, rehabilitated. So while doctors saw this cooperative, studious young man eager to improve, Kemper was also absorbing information that would later help him manipulate the very system designed to contain him. And with also being exposed to all of the horrific things that these men did, may have given him some ideas. We certainly can't say for sure, but it may have sparked a very dangerous curiosity within him. However, because he seemed like he was doing so well, on December 18th, 1969, his 21st birthday, 6 years after the murder of his grandparents, Ed Kemper walked out of Atascadero State Hospital a free man. Now, this decision to release him remains one of the most controversial aspects of this case. Part of the reason, undoubtedly, was that many of the psychiatrists and psychologists who had worked with Kemper genuinely believed that he had been rehabilitated. They were like, he's healed. Praise Jesus. Now, they didn't live in the South, so I don't know why I said it like that. But as professionals, this is concerning to me because that is how easily he was able to trick these people who were actual professionals with degrees. As professionals, they wanted to believe that their treatments had been effective, which is understandable. Of course you do. But mental health institutions exist to help people improve. And success stories are, what every clinician hopes for. Absolutely. But there should have been some other safeguards in place. What those were, I don't know. I'm not a professional, but I think that there should have been more to ensure he was actually okay to release into society. Because 6 years is not a particularly long time when you're talking about someone who murdered both of his grandparents. Now, in their defense, I mean, he had been an ideal patient. And this is a reoccurring theme with him. He seems so kind when you listen to interviews. Guys, he is so polite. He is so cooperative. He is so smart. And he seems so eager to just like sit and chat with you. He would have done great in like sales or something. He could have convinced a fish to buy a snorkel. You're like, dude, you could have done so many great things in your life, but like, you're so fucked up. Like, your brain is real fucked. So that's why, compared to many of the other patients housed at Atascadero, murderers, rapists, very, very violent offenders, he stood out for all the right reasons. Not only because he was a teenager, who when he started there and he accepted therapy, he studied diligently, he rarely caused any trouble, he was super polite. So, to the people evaluating him, he appeared vastly different from the dangerous men around him. And ultimately, that's why he was released. But that was a major problem because this version of Ed Kemper that they were seeing wasn't the real Ed. During his years there, he had gained extensive knowledge about psychology, psychiatric evaluations, personality testing, criminal profiling. He understood what doctors wanted to hear. So, by all appearances, he had become exceptionally skilled at presenting himself as a success story. And what makes his release from this hospital even more astonishing is that multiple professionals reportedly agreed on one critical condition. And that was, if Kemper was ever to be released, he should be kept as far away from his mother as possible. This was not a casual suggestion. These were psychiatrists, psychologists who had spent years evaluating him. Many believed that the one relationship most likely to trigger future violence was the relationship with his mother. They didn't recommend limited contact. They didn't recommend occasional visits. They didn't suggest family counseling. Their recommendation was keep him away from her at all costs. So this made it even more complicated when he was released into the care of his mother, Clarnell. They were like, it'll be fine. That's his mom. Clearly not knowing what that can do to a person. And his mother, at this time when she took him back in, she had remarried. She had taken the surname Strandberg and then she divorced again and was no longer living where they grew up. She was living in Aptos, California, which was a short drive from where she worked as an administrative assistant at the University of California, Santa Cruz. So that's UCSC. So while Kemper was living with his mother, part of his parole agreement was that he would seek psychiatric help, psychotherapy. And he did that. He followed all of the rules. So this later demonstrated further to his psychiatrist that he was rehabilitated. And on December 29th, 1972, his juvenile records were completely expunged. So if he were to apply for a job, they would not see that he killed his grandparents because he was a minor at the time and he's proven that he's fine now. In fact, the last report from his probation psychiatrist reads, and this is kind of long, so stick with me, quote, "If I were to see this patient without having any history available or getting any history from him, I would think that we're dealing with a very well-adjusted young man who had initiative, intelligence, and who was free of any psychiatric illness. It is my opinion that he has made a very excellent response to the years of treatment and rehabilitation, and I would see no psychiatric reason to consider him to be of any danger to himself or to any member of society. Since it may allow him more freedom as an adult to develop his potential, I would consider it reasonable to have a permanent expunction of his juvenile records." End quote. A professional, a psychiatric professional who deals with criminals every day on parole said, "We're good, fam. Like, all is well. He's fine." So that's terrifying. Again, this dude could charm the pants off of you. They were like, "Yeah, seems like a great guy. Seems awesome." My goodness. So after being let out while staying with his mother, Kemper actually attended community college in accordance with his parole requirements. And he tried to be normal, I guess one might say. But this whole situation of being placed back with his mother was very, very stressful for Ed. And we all know what happens when serial killers get stressed. I eat some cookie dough. Ed, he doesn't do that. Instead, neighbors would often overhear arguments between he and his mother. His relationship with Clarnell remained very toxic and very hostile. Kemper would later comment on these arguments that he would have with his mother, and he said, quote, "My mother and I started right in on horrendous battles, just horrible battles, violent and vicious. I've never been in such vicious verbal battle with anyone. I would go to fists with a man, but this was my mother, and I couldn't stand the thought of my mother and I doing these things. She insisted on it and just over stupid things. I remember one roof raiser was over whether I should have my teeth cleaned." End quote. So they were fighting over everything. Everything from taking out the garbage to going to the dentist. There was no safe conversation to be had. So this led to Ed eventually moving out. Kemper worked a few odd jobs here and there to save up money, and once he had saved up enough, he moved out to live with a friend in Alameda. There, though, he still complained of being unable to get away from his mother because, according to him, she regularly phoned him and paid him surprise visits. And I guess, like many of us in our early 20s, he had a lot of financial difficulties during this time, which resulted in him frequently returning to his mother's apartment. And that was just no good. Your parents should always be a safe landing place, right? You should always be able to go home. And that does suck that he didn't have that. He had no safe place. But I don't feel that bad for him, right? As a child, Ed, I felt bad. As a grown up, I don't feel bad for you. So at this time, when he was working odd jobs, having financial difficulties, kind of living between his place and his mother's place, he met a female student from Turlock High School at Santa Cruz Beach, and the two of them became engaged in March of 1973. And their engagement only lasted about a year because Ed ended up getting arrested again. Probably good that she didn't marry him. And her parents requested that her name never be revealed to the public because, as I said, she was in high school. Not just because of what Ed had done, but also because she was a literal child. She was reportedly 17 and still attending high school when she was engaged to Ed. And guys, they were engaged for a year, which means she was probably 16 when they started dating, and he was 21. And I know Ed was really emotionally immature because he went into a psychiatric facility at 15 and then was released at 21. And 21-year-old men aren't really that mature anyways. But he missed out on a lot of normal development during that time, a lot of just normal milestones that you have to reach to have life experience. So I'm not super surprised that he went for a 17-year-old, but it's real gross that he did. Because even though he is a genius, right? He was super, super smart. He was just not emotionally developed in any way, shape, or form. But at the same time, he spoke so intelligently. And this made a lot of people trust him. He was like a big teddy bear. He had a very soothing voice, which will lead us to a little fun fact about Ed in part two. But I can see why, people were drawn to him, including this young lady, especially if she didn't know what he was capable of. Hopefully she's doing well now. But he was just a walking red flag. Now, that same year that all that was happening, he ended up working for the highway division. And during this time, he was in an accident. He was hit by a car while riding a motorcycle that he had recently purchased, and his arm was badly injured in the crash. So he received $15,000 in settlement money in a civil suit that he filed against the driver. So $15,000 is equivalent to $108,000 in today's money. Now, with this money, he could have really gotten away from his mother, like moved states away from her and done something with his life, gone into sales, like I said. But no, he's in his 20s. So you know what he did? He bought a car because, guys in cars or whatever. And so he was riding around in a 1969 Ford Galaxy, a bright yellow Ford Galaxy. Which brings me to one of my main questions about guys like Ed. Why do serial killers have yellow cars? What's up with that? Or just like cars of bright colors, right? Samuel Little, he drove a yellow Cadillac. Or for whatever reason, freaking Ford Galaxies. David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, he also drove a Ford Galaxy. And then with the bright colored car thing, Ted Bundy also had a stolen orange Volkswagen, right? His little Beetle that he drove. I don't think, no, John Wayne Gacy had a black car. But all of that to say, if you have a yellow car, I don't trust you. Not get in your car. Anyways, despite everything, despite all of what was happening, Kemper attempted to build some normalcy in his life. He worked, like I said, a series of odd jobs before eventually finding employment with the California Department of Public Work as a laborer. And by this point, he had grown into an enormous man. He was 6'9" and weighed approximately 300 pounds. That's a big dude. I don't know if you guys know anybody who's like over 6'5". I do. Hi, Big Sam, if you're listening. I don't know how tall he is. I should ask. But Big Sam, he's a big dude. That's why we call him Big Sam. Kemper was impossible to miss. 6'9"? Good Lord. And the fact that he had so much rage inside of him makes it so terrifying. I know plenty of people like our friend who are just like actual teddy bears, like actual big dudes with big hearts. There's like super lovable, but not Ed. Ed presented himself that way, but deep inside, obviously, things were not all right. And his size became one of his defining characteristics, earning him the nickname Big Ed. So anyone who knows about Ed Kemper knows that he was obsessed with the police. He wanted to be a police officer. And this isn't very unusual among serial killers. Many are actually drawn to police work. I have found they're drawn to criminal investigations. They talk to people they shouldn't. They return to the scene. They like to chat with people responsible for catching criminals. They even write into police officers because being around officers provides information. It's exciting to them. It's a sense of connection to the very system trying to stop offenders like them. They love it. It's like the thrill of the chase. And Kemper would begin frequenting like local establishments where police officers gathered, most notably a bar known as the jury room. Over time, he befriended several officers and became a familiar face among law enforcement. They were like, oh, that's just Ed. He comes in a lot. He likes to talk. And boy, did he. He would talk their ears off. He would just sit and chat for hours. That is what he's known for. Like if you listen to interviews with Ed, he you don't even have to ask him a question. You can just look at him and he'll start spilling his guts. Like he just loves to talk. Word vomit to the extreme. And these officers who knew him, they generally described him as like really friendly, very intelligent, genuinely interested in police work. And he listened really carefully to their stories. He asked a lot of thoughtful questions. He seemed just fascinated by what they did. And many of them simply saw him as just a nice guy who enjoyed their company. Because why wouldn't you, And like I said before, Kemper wanted to become a police officer himself. And under ordinary circumstances, that would be alarming enough because of him, his past, and what he goes on to do. But remember, they had expunged his juvenile record. They wanted him to start fresh. So even if he did become a police officer, they wouldn't know what he had done. And because he knew that there was nothing on his record anymore, he seriously tried to pursue a law enforcement career. Fortunately for all of us, one factor stood in his way, and that is he was simply too tall. I know. I didn't know that was a thing until I'd heard about Ed, when I first heard about him. I didn't know that you could be too tall to be a police officer, but apparently you can. They don't want you too big because you're scary, I guess. I don't know. At 6'9", he exceeded the height requirements for the agencies that he considered joining. Ironically, the physical characteristic that made him so intimidating prevented him from entering law enforcement. I don't know about you guys, but I am such a bookworm. I love a rainy day and getting cozy with a new book. I even love the smell of books. And of course, mystery or thrillers are my go to, but finding the time to sit down and actually read them, that's the real mystery. So, as much as I love the feel and smell of a good page turner, I also love Audible. You can listen to thousands of audiobooks, podcasts, and originals while doing literally anything. And the best part, your entire library goes with you. True crime, paranormal deep dives, thrillers, memoirs, whatever your brain may be craving, Audible probably has it. Start listening today by grabbing your free Audible trial through the link in my show notes. With an Audible membership, you get 1 credit every month to download any audiobook you want to keep for free. Plus, unlimited listening to thousands of podcasts and Audible originals with Audible Standard. So whether you're driving, cleaning, walking the dog, cooking dinner, or spiraling down a late night true crime rabbit hole again, your next story can go with you. Start a free trial today, download the Audible app, and begin listening in minutes. Just check the link in my show notes to get started. Your next obsession is waiting. This podcast is sponsored by Dubby Energy Drinks. You guys, I have made a lot of questionable decisions in my life, but this is not one of them. Dubby is the best. If you've been searching for a clean alternative to an energy drink, look no further. Dubby is a clean energy drink mixture that's designed to help you feel productive without that nasty crash afterward. It's sugar-free, has no artificial dyes, no nasty fillers, and it's packed with vitamins, amino acids, and all the good stuff that we need to really help with focus. They also use 150 milligrams of caffeine per serving, which for me is the sweet spot where I feel like awake and productive, but not like I just chewed on a power line and I'm about to astral project against my will. And they have so many flavors, guys. They have unique ones like Japanese yuzu, and they even have a s'mores flavor. I also really love that it comes in tubs, so I can just mix it whenever I need it. And it feels a lot smoother and cleaner than traditional energy drinks. My life really loves the element of surprise, and Debbie has been coming through for me to get me through the day. So if you're like me and you've tried everything, but you keep getting disappointed, Debbie is here to save the day. Head on over to debbie.gg and use my code SUSPECTS10 to save some money and also save your nervous system. That's code SUSPECTS10 at debbie.gg. Link is in the show notes to get started. We love our pets, but sometimes they act like feral raccoons on a Red Bull binge. Like my pit bull Rizzo, for example. She is 10 years old and still chews like a puppy in the velociraptor phase of doggy development. In fact, one of her favorite pastimes is running up the backyard wall, jumping into the tree, and trying to grab birds or lizards, which is hilarious to watch, but also, please don't bring me the birds. So, if you also have a dog with the energy of a caffeinated raccoon, I found something amazing. It's called the Woof Popsicle. It's basically a popsicle style toy for dogs that you fill with treats so that they stay busy instead of eating things that they definitely should not eat when those zoomies hit. My favorite part is that they have refill pops. So when your dog finishes one and then stares at you like you personally ruined their life, you can just pop another one in. So the next time your dog is behaving like Michael Scott yelling parkour and launching themselves off the furniture and you fear for their safety, give them a little treat to keep them busy. Head to the link in the show notes for the Pupsicle and the refill pops. Your pup will thank you. Now, as we know, at this time, Kemper was living with a roommate. Sometimes he had to go back to his mom's because of financial struggles, but he was kind of like between his apartment and hers. And he had purchased a yellow Ford Galaxy. And that Ford Galaxy would become one of the most important tools in his criminal career. Because around this time that he had been rejected from the police force, that darkness was just festering inside of him. The fantasies that had existed since childhood were becoming actual plans. Kemper began taking what could only best be described as practice runs for what he would eventually begin doing. Much like other organized offenders, because he is considered an organized serial killer, he found a lot of excitement, not only in the violence itself, but in preparation. Planning became part of his that like gratification process. He would drive for hours along the California Pacific Coast, that Pacific Coast Highway, specifically looking for female hitchhikers. And at first he wasn't killing them. Like I said, these were practice runs. Instead, he was just studying them, which is terrifying. That is so scary. He was learning how to make women feel comfortable around a 6'9" stranger. He was testing different approaches, different conversations, different ways of presenting himself. Every interaction was very essential. It was like a rehearsal for him. Most people don't automatically feel at ease climbing into a car with a 300-pound giant, and he understood this about himself. And the more women he successfully convinced to ride with him, the more confidence he gained in his ability to control future encounters. So, as he cruised the Pacific Coast highways, he was refining his techniques. He learned how to appear harmless. He learned how to establish trust very quickly. He learned how to just blend into the background despite his imposing size. And it is claimed that before he actually killed anybody during these runs, he had picked up approximately 150 female hitchhikers. Imagine. That is so scary. And even scarier is that at this time, he began assembling what investigators would later describe as a kill kit. But it wasn't what you would normally think of. It wasn't like an organized bag like Bundy's or BTK's. Instead, his consisted of extensively outfitting his Ford Galaxy with items to abduct, murder, and transport his victims. His vehicle's trunk and interior contained handcuffs, various knives and swords for some reason, ropes, large plastic garbage bags, blankets and towels, police radios and scanners so that he could monitor local law enforcement. So, not like an actual bag of sorts, but the items were in his car. So, Ed may not have been actively murdering anybody yet, but he was purchasing items that he believed would eventually become useful. He had spent years fantasizing, having violent ideation, allowing it to just evolve. And now he had freedom, transportation, and opportunity. The yellow Ford Galaxy gave him mobility, the practice runs gave him confidence, the kill kit gave him preparation. All that really remained now was the right trigger. And eventually, he got it. Because when his money ran out from that settlement money, man, he just like burned through that settlement. And once again, he found himself unable to support himself financially. So with no savings left and few options available, he was forced to do the one thing that nearly every professional who had treated him warned against. He moved back in with his mother. And by now, his mother had been divorced 3 times. According to Kemper, she routinely criticized the men in her life. She belittled them and eventually drove them away. He believed that she emasculated them and poisoned every relationship she entered. And apparently, she was also very successful in her career at the university. Because remember, she worked at University of California, Santa Cruz. And I guess that success of hers really bothered him. Like it irritated Ed. So he would focus on her flaws. Here was a woman who, despite her problems, continued to function professionally and maintain independence. And for someone carrying years of resentment, that was extremely difficult for him to accept. He viewed her as the source of his pain. And now, after years of violent fantasies, psychiatric treatment, manipulation, rehearsals, planning, he was back under her roof, and that pissed him off. And the stage was set for everything that would follow. And by the spring of 1972, Kemper's practice runs had come to an end. He now knew exactly what kind of victims he was looking for and how to persuade them to get into his car. The fantasies that had occupied his mind for years were no longer theoretical. He was ready, and he was going to find someone. Which brings us to May 7th of 1972. Kemper had been driving around and he spotted two 18-year-old students hitchhiking. Their names were Marianne Pache and Anita Lucchesa. Both were students from Fresno State University who were trying to make their way to Stanford University to visit some friends. Kemper drove past them, and that was the moment it all truly began. Keep in mind that his Ford Galaxy was a two-door vehicle. So once someone climbed into the back seat, their ability to escape became very, very difficult in a normal situation and pretty much impossible in the presence of a man like Kemper. So Ed pulled over. He waited for them to accept, and after some hesitation, they did. They accepted the ride. Once the girls got into the vehicle, Kemper knew what he was going to do. He had carefully thought out every aspect of his plan. He knew the routes he would take. He knew the isolated locations where he could avoid detection. He also understood the local roads through his work with the California Department of Public Works, and he was confident enough to navigate unfamiliar-looking routes without immediately alarming his passengers. So for a while, while he's making conversation with Marianne and Anita, they trusted him. They listened to him, they talked with him, but eventually, the drive took them somewhere it wasn't supposed to. Kemper steered the vehicle toward a secluded area in the woods, very far from where they expected to be. Instead of arriving at their destination of Stanford University, they were now alone with a giant stranger in an isolated location. I cannot imagine how scared these girls must have felt. Because even with two victims and one offender, the physical reality of the situation heavily favored Kemper. He was enormous. And they likely understood almost immediately that physically overpowering this man would be extremely difficult or impossible. Now, I'm going to be getting into some details here, so just a trigger warning, and it only gets worse as we go. So accounts, they do differ somewhat regarding exactly how the murders unfolded this time, but according to the version investigators pieced together, Kemper first handcuffed Marianne, and then he placed Anita in the trunk of his car, effectively separating the two women and ensuring they could not help one another. After securing Anita in the trunk, Kemper then returned to Marianne and he stabbed her to death. And this is not a quick or a clean murder. Stabbing deaths are often prolonged, they're chaotic, and they're particularly when the attacker lacks experience. Unless a vital organ or major artery is struck immediately, victims can remain conscious and they suffer for an extended period of time. So her death was likely very drawn out. Meanwhile, while that is happening, police believe that Anita Lucchesa was trapped in the trunk, and whether she could hear what was happening remains unknown, but the possibility of that is horrifying. Imagine just sitting there in the darkness, tied up, listening to signs of your friend outside the vehicle being murdered, knowing that there's little chance of escape for you and no chance of helping her. It's unimaginable. So police believe in this version that once Marianne was dead, Kemper opened the trunk and attacked Anita as well, also stabbing her to death. Now, Kemper himself later offered a slightly different version of events. In his telling, he handcuffed Marianne first, but then led Anita into the woods before killing her. So in his version, he did not put Anita in the trunk. He said that then after murdering Anita in the woods, he returned to the car covered in blood. And Marianne understandably panicked and asked what happened to her friend. And Kemper claimed that he told her he had punched Anita in the nose because she had been, quote, getting smart with him, which is already very unsettling. You see this giant behemoth of a man walking back to you covered in blood, and he says he punched your friend in the face because she got smart with him. So immediately you're probably thinking, well, what are you going to do to me? And if I comply and I don't get smart with you, will you let me go? So he said that he lied because he didn't want Marianne to immediately realize that she was about to die. In his mind, delaying that realization was somehow merciful. It was a kindness. I don't know. But it is an example of the very bizarre and contradictory thinking that frequently appears in his interviews. He could brutally murder someone and then frame a momentary deception as an act of mercy. What is also really bizarre to me is that at one point, Kemper recalled accidentally brushing Marianne's breast when he went to handcuff her, and he immediately apologized for it. That that I don't know why, but that detail really upsets me. It's very unsettling. So, things are going to get worse, guys. I'm sorry. After murdering both young women, Kemper then loaded their bodies into the trunk of his Ford Galaxy and he drove back toward his apartment or his mother's apartment. And that decision alone reveals a remarkable level of confidence or recklessness, depending on how you look at it. Because not only did he share this living space with someone, anyone could have seen him. Like a neighbor could have noticed something, his mother could have seen what he was doing. Yet his desire to possess these bodies and continue interacting with them appears to have outweighed any concern about getting caught. He was just very fixated on getting these girls into his home. And amazingly, actually, he did almost get caught on his way home because on that drive, Kemper was reportedly pulled over by a police officer because of a broken tail light. With two dead bodies in his car, he was pulled over, then he was let go. I mean, you guys, he stabbed these women. There was likely blood in the vehicle. There was likely blood on him. He just stabbed two women to death. As morbid as it is to say, that's very messy, right? So, one request to search his car could have ended everything before his actual spree had truly begun. Yet somehow, the stop ended without incident. The officer never discovered the bodies. Kemper's calm demeanor may have played a role because, that's what he's known for. His personality was just like that. His ability to remain composed under extraordinary circumstances really benefited him. In interviews, he would appear articulate, thoughtful, and really relaxed, way too relaxed. And again, the officers who knew him socially just saw him as intelligent and personable. To them, that was just Big Ed. He wasn't dangerous. He was just a big, silly guy who loved to chat. We can't say for certain, but perhaps the officer who pulled him over knew him. And that's why they let him go or didn't search his car. Whatever the case, he got away. And once he arrived back to his home / his mother's home, the crimes just escalated into a very disturbing new ritual. And this would go on to be his thing that he was known for doing and what he enjoyed most about the killings. This monster brought these two girls home and then photographed their nude bodies in various sexual positions. And then he engaged in acts of necrophilia. He later admitted to police to having sexual intercourse with their corpses and described a particular fixation on receiving oral sex from these dead women. I know. I told you it was going to get worse. I'm sorry. He is a vile, vile waste of DNA. It is awful what he did to these poor women. Unfortunately, this is a reoccurring fixation of his. But it's also very important to the story because it proves that he is not acting in a paranoid way. These acts were not brought on by hallucination, and they were not impulsive in any way. They formed part of a ritual that would become increasingly important for him as his crimes progressed. And at one point, Ed actually discussed the practical aspects of working with bodies after death. Because a lot of people probably think that this is a messy situation, bringing them in, dismembering, things like that, which usually it is. But Ed explained that once the blood coagulated, dismemberment created less of a mess than many people might imagine. And this mattered a lot to him because he was so methodical. So, like many organized killers, he approached his crimes in stages. First was the murder, then was the dismemberment, and then there was the disposal. And rather than leaving the bodies intact, he would carefully cut them apart, place them into plastic bags, and transport them to various locations where the discovery would be less likely. And the murders did not end with death, unfortunately, because for Kemper, death was only the beginning of the process. Because after dismembering Marianne and Anita, he removed their heads. So he decapitated them. And this became another reoccurring feature of his crimes. He would hold on to the heads for additional acts of sexual gratification before eventually disposing of them. When he did decide that he was done with them, he would later dump the heads in a ravine. Now, the plastic bags with their remains he had abandoned near Loma Prieta Mountain. And in August of that year, 1972, Marianne's skull was found on Loma Prieta Mountain. And they did an extensive search to try and find the rest of her, but the search ultimately failed. And they also never found a single trace of Anita Luchessa. This level of dehumanization is impossible to comprehend. And by this stage, the victims were no longer individuals in his mind, they had just become objects. They just existed solely for his use. Now, the families, of course, knew nothing about what happened. They only knew that two young women had vanished. The disappearances were completely out of character for these young ladies. Marianne and Anita were very responsible college students with families who loved them and expected them to come home. So, of course, there were search efforts that began. Concerns grew very, very quickly, but there was practically nothing aside from Marianne's skull that was found. Most of her remains were never recovered. Anita Luchessa's body was never fully located either. Kemper had done exactly what he set out to do. He had murdered two young women, dismembered them, scattered their remains, and successfully avoided detection. What is wild to me is that his first co-ed murder, right? Not his first murder, but his first co-ed murder, because he's known as the co-ed killer, was a double murder. That is very rare, and it shows a lot of confidence. Even more troubling is that he remained completely under the radar. He was just continued spending time with local police officers. He continued visiting the jury room. He presented himself as the friendly, intelligent giant that everyone knew and loved or thought they knew. Meanwhile, the man sitting across from them in the bar had already committed two horrific murders and defiled these women in ways that makes me feel disgusting for even repeating. And he was only getting started, you guys. So that was in May. And then on September 14th, 1972, he struck again. This time, his victim was 15. I know, 15-year-old Aiko Ku, a very talented young dancer who had simply just been trying to get to class. So Aiko she was a belly dancer, and her story kills me because not only do I have a 14-year-old, so I immediately think of my baby, but it is heartbreaking because her circumstances were so ordinary. She was not known for hitchhiking. On that day, she missed her bus and she was worried that she would be late for dance class. So, faced with the possibility of arriving late, she made a decision that countless young people made during that time. It was the 70s. A lot of people did hitchhike, so she probably thought it was fine. But oh my God, she should have just been late because she accepted a ride. And unfortunately, the driver who stopped was Ed. It was Ed Kemper. And this contrast between them was even more alarming because Aiko was a petite 15-year-old dancer. Kemper was a freaking giant and a predator who had already now killed multiple times. And he had a plan. He did exactly as he had done before. He made her feel really comfortable on the drive, asked her, oh, where's your class? I'll take you to class. No big deal. It's on my way anyways. And then ended up driving her to a remote location. This time, though, he did not stab her. He actually ended up pulling out a gun. And then something insane happened. Kemper got out of the vehicle and accidentally locked himself out of the car. And the gun he had was inside of the car. So for a brief moment, Aiko had an opportunity that none of his previous victims had been given. She could have fled. She could have even potentially grabbed the gun and shot him in self-defense, but she didn't. Most likely she's 15. She maybe didn't fully understand what was happening, or maybe she did and she was so scared that she couldn't act. I mean, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn are very real things. And knowing Ed, I mean, he may have just manipulated her. She ended up unlocking the door and letting him back into the car. This is one of those moments that just breaks you because a 15-year-old girl is trying to respond in a way that she probably feels will keep her safe. And instead, she was met with violence because once he was back inside the vehicle, he took complete control. Trigger warning again here. Kemper ended up strangling Aiko. He raped her and then killed her. A 15-year-old. And after doing so, he followed much of the same ritual that he had now established with his previous victims. He transported her body in the trunk of his car, but this time there was a notable change in his behavior because instead of immediately returning home, he stopped at a bar. Yeah, he stopped at a bar. And to a lot of people, that might seem like an attempt to calm his nerves or maybe a detachment from what he had just done. But when viewed psychologically, alongside his later statements and the pattern seen in other serial offenders, it appears to me to have been something along the lines of anticipation. Like he was very excited and he wanted to build up the anticipation of finally being able to do what he wanted to do. Because think about it. I mean, he had just gotten away with another killing. And then he sat in a bar drinking, likely talking to the people around him, perhaps even police officers, that he knew socially, all while having committed another horrendous crime and this young girl being in his trunk. I truly believe that in his mind, this excitement wasn't over. It was just the beginning. So every minute extended the fantasy for him. Every drink prolonged the anticipation of what he planned to do next. And eventually he did. Because later, Kemper admitted that after leaving that bar, he returned to his car and opened the trunk to just simply look at Aiko's body and admire her, like a, quote, fisherman admiring his catch, end quote. He compared her to a fucking fish. He is so void of any sense of human emotion. I want to punch him in the fucking face. It is so sick. He said seeing her there was exhilarating for him. It confirmed what he had done and reinforced the sense of power that he felt from having successfully committed another murder. And when he eventually returned home, that same horrifying pattern unfolded. He engaged in necrophilia. He photographed her body. He then dismembered and disposed of the remains in a similar manner as his previous two victims. Aiko's mother did call the police to report the disappearance of her daughter when she found out that she never made it to dance class. And she put up hundreds of flyers asking for information, but she did not receive any responses regarding her daughter's location or status. So all they knew was that their 15-year-old daughter had vanished. Her disappearance was entirely out of character, again, just like Marianne and Anita. Her parents immediately became concerned and they contacted authorities. Missing person posters appeared throughout the area. People searched desperately for answers, and none came. There were no witnesses who could explain where she had gone. No one contacted the family with any information. It was as though she had just vanished. She just disappeared. When in reality, she had become another victim of a killer that no one was suspecting. This girl, this 15-year-old girl, talented, driven, deeply loved by her family, was now gone. And years later, her mother would remember the last night she saw her daughter and just talk about how beautiful she was that night. And after Aiko disappeared, her mother insisted from the very beginning that something terrible had happened. She said, quote, "I never believed she ran away. I have always said she was kidnapped," end quote. She also recalled having a really strange feeling in the months before Aiko vanished that just something bad was going to happen to change their lives. And the most heartbreaking quote of all was when her mother said, "I didn't want her to go that night." So her mom didn't even want her to go to dance class that night, but Aiko wanted to attend. It was something she did regularly. She really wanted to go to class, and she just happened to miss her bus. So it's just heartbreaking. I mean, we can't look at the ifs, ands, or buts and dwell on that because obviously it doesn't change anything. It's just sad. It's it's just all very fucked up. And unfortunately, Ed was not going to stop anytime soon. So, as we know, Kemper had exhausted all of that motorcycle settlement money. His financial situation deteriorated rapidly. He was unable to afford independent living, which is why he was living with his mother. And throughout the years, Kemper painted a really deeply negative picture of his mother. In interviews, he repeatedly described her as very critical and harsh and emotionally damaging. And a lot of professionals believe that this homecoming coincided with his dramatic escalation. And on January 7th, 1973, he encountered another victim, 18-year-old Cindy Shaw. This time, Kemper was driving around near Cabrillo College, and this time his plan unfolded as it always did. He saw Cindy walking along, and he made her feel very comfortable. He pulled over, said, "Hey, come on in. Where are you headed? I'll give you a ride," and then proceeded to drive her to another wooded, secluded area, which I just have to pause for a moment and say that I have heard police officers, I have heard investigators, I have heard self-defense instructors all say the same thing. And that is you have a higher chance of surviving a gunshot wound than you do going to a second location. And that was just all I could think about while doing my research for this case because every single one of these girls were brought to a different location than they had originally planned. If anyone is ever like, "Oh, I just got to stop here real quick. Oh, I just have to pull over here. I have to stop at my house really fast." Fuck no, you don't. Either let me out or we're going to have a problem. I mean, thank God now we have mace that can, just clip to our keys. We have cell phones with location tracking. But even then, it's like, is that even enough? Because once a person like this decides what they're going to do with you, there's no changing their mind. And it becomes a very, very scary situation. I mean, thank God now people don't hitchhike or things like that, but we have Ubers, we have Lyfts, we have people who do ride shares for a living, and you just never know what someone's capable of. So, like, always carry mace with you. Always say hell fucking no if they want to take you to another location first. Make sure your Uber is for you, but do not say your name before getting into your Uber. Do not say, "Oh, is this for so and so?" You wait for them to fucking say your name. You wait for them to ensure that they are there to do what they're supposed to. And even then, if you're in a car by yourself, don't hesitate to be like, if they're making conversation with you, be like, "Oh, yeah, I just got my concealed carry permit. So I'm really happy. Like, I'm really excited." Because they don't fucking know. They don't know if you have a gun. like, like that's always good go to. But it's just, it fucking sucks. It's sad that we have to even think of these things. But, anyways, so Ed ended up driving Cindy Shaw to another location than had been initially planned, and he fatally shot her with a .22 caliber pistol. He then placed her body in the trunk of his car and drove to his mother's house, where he kept her body hidden in a closet in his room overnight. And when his mother left for work in the morning, he had sexual intercourse with Shaw's corpse. He then removed the bullet from her body, dismembered and decapitated her in his mother's bathtub. Kemper would then go on to keep Shaw's severed head for several days. And when he was done with it, he buried it in his mother's garden, facing upward toward her bedroom. After his arrest, he stated that he did this because his mother, quote, always wanted people to look up to her, which got, I, I can't. I can't with this man. Ed, shut the fuck up. You don't sound deep or symbolic, and now is not the time for jokes either. He's just so, my God. He then discarded the rest of Shaw's remains by throwing them off a cliff, and over the course of the following weeks, all except Shaw's head and right hand were discovered. A pathologist determined that Shaw had been cut into pieces with a power saw. So really, really horrific. Let's take a moment to understand that he was becoming increasingly bold. Okay. Unlike some of the earlier murders, because Kemper, he later admitted that part of his motivation did involve his mother, which is clear. And according to his own statements, he wanted to disrespect her and exert power over her. He even claimed that that was his reason for bringing victims back to the house and engaging in sexual acts with their corpses, was because his mother was nearby, and this made him feel powerful. This made him feel like basically a giant fuck you to his mom. There's a lot to unpack there. Whether every detail of those claims is accurate is difficult to verify. Kemper occasionally seemed to enjoy shocking interviewers and increasing his own notoriety. But regardless of that, he did bring Shaw's body back to his mother's house. He hid her remains in his room. He also claimed that he felt a, quote, special connection to Cindy Shaw. Exactly what he meant by that is difficult to determine. But nevertheless, he repeatedly stated that there was something unique about his feelings toward Cindy Shaw. And because of that perceived connection, this is why he kept her head for several days. He kept her head longer than the other victims. And I really don't know if there was symbolism with like how he buried her head. I don't even know if that genuinely mattered to him or whether it was just something he developed later when reflecting on his crimes. It's impossible to know. But what we do know is that he was becoming increasingly reckless, and he was not done. He was no longer simply just killing, using, and disposing of victims. He was now preserving trophies longer. He was keeping body parts until he felt they had served their purpose, and was now creating a ritual, a pattern. And what is insane to me is that he was doing all of this while living under the same roof as his mother. This part of the story really reminds me of Jeffrey Dahmer in some ways, because he kept corpses in his grandmother's house when he was living with her in Wisconsin. I think it was the four men that he had lured back and killed and kept there. I believe it was in her basement. And he said, he just didn't want them to leave. He was really lonely, and that's why he killed them. So he had different reasonings, obviously, for his crimes. He had a lot of other stuff going on too. Definitely some mommy issues there for sure as well. But for Ed, in Ed's case, he just hated women, and he was just getting started, because as his confidence grew, so did the risks he was willing to take. He had now murdered 4 young women, plus his grandparents. So 6 total murders under his belt, and he was not done. In fact, it just gets worse. And that is why, my twisted friends, we are going to stop here for part 1. Like I said, this is a rough one. This is not an easy story to cover, and there are more victims because he killed a total of 10 people. So in part 2, we will discuss the other murders he committed, as well as the eventual murder of his mother and her friend, which, if you know the story, you know that part. We're going to get into his capture, the psychology behind his mannerisms, and we're also going to look at some behavioral analyst input, as well as FBI mindhunter John Douglas's opinions. We're gonna deep dive, guys, because if I'm gonna do a heavy hitter case like this, I'm gonna try my very best to include as much as I possibly can. So hope you can join me next week for part 2 of this horrific man. we are going to pause the paranormal episode next week. We're just going to roll right into part 2. So that will be out on June 10th. Yes, June 10th. So I haven't decided if I'll do 2 TikToks for this or just 1, but we'll be back on track for our regularly scheduled program after part 2. Before we get going, though, I have a fun fact for you all because we need a palate cleanser after all of that bullshit. Fun fact time. So this one, this one really made me just so thankful for modern living. You guys ready? I don't know if you could ever be ready for this one. Okay. So apparently, ancient Romans used urine as mouthwash. Yes, fresh urine, nice and fresh from the body. Because it contains ammonia, and ammonia cleans things. Romans thought, perfect, let's brush our teeth with pee. And that led to the urine trade in Rome. Yes, I said urine trade. So there was very high demand back then. Urine was actually very highly valuable. It was a hot commodity in the Roman Empire. Public urinals were placed around the streets, and the contents were collected to be sold to laundries, tanneries, and dental hygienists. Don't believe it? Google it, friends. It was real. It was a real thing. And then there was the taxation of it, because what are you doing if you can't make extra money off your pee? So the trade was so lucrative and widespread that the emperor, Emperor Nero, and then the later Emperor Vespasian, they placed a tax on the urine trade. Now, there was no pee party, like a Boston Tea Party. There was none of that. I was sad to learn that. But no, they didn't do shit like that. Instead, there were imports. So some historical sources note that bottled urine from Portugal was highly prized for its alleged superior teeth whitening qualities. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but that's what it said. So, yeah, guys, that's your fun fact. You're welcome. I have never been more thankful for toothpaste and Listerine. Thank God nobody is trading urine anymore unless, I don't know, unless it's like, oh, weird little kink, weird kinky yours. I mean, no shade. Do what makes you happy, I guess. Not my cup of pee or tea, but hey, do you, babe? All power to you. What am I saying? Okay, well, with that now being part of your cornucopia of useless knowledge, I hope you all have a great day. Send this to a friend who likes to fall asleep to true crime documentaries, and go leave an Apple review for the podcast. We have not had one in months, you guys. Months. It's sort of sad. But also, I know a lot of people are just passive listeners, so they'll listen and not ever leave a review. But I know you guys are listening because I can see the numbers. So please leave a review. It really does help so much. Indie podcasts rely a lot on word of mouth, reviews, ratings, because it tells the podcast gods that it should be on people's radar, and it can actually help with sponsorships, collabs, networking, that sort of stuff. So there you go. It takes 2 seconds of your time. Go leave a review and then have a great day. And don't get into any yellow cars unless it's, I guess, a taxi and you actually know it's a taxi for you. Even then, though, just be aware. Be aware of your surroundings. Be good humans. And as always, remember to trust your lizard brain. Until next time, goodbye.